This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. And if you're looking for podcast production support, we highly recommend them. Find them at trisonic.co.uk.
If you are a brand and you are only assessing the effectiveness of your creative by looking at 1, 2, or 3 ads on major campaigns, it is an enormous blind spot. It's like having a shower and just washing one finger.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. How to bring creative and media together. It's an open question that has perplexed advertising leaders for as long as I've been reporting on the industry, and to be sure, much longer before then. It's been true for many years now that the big money in advertising has been shifting away from creative and toward media, from the big creative idea to data-led measurement of a brand's performance. But it's also true that it's almost impossible to succeed without both sides of the coin working in your favor. Earlier this summer, we heard from VCCP Media's Will Parrish about how attention measurement is one way in which the gap between media and creative could be bridged. If you haven't already listened to that episode, check it out. It's a great conversation. But today I wanted to follow up on the topic from a slightly more creative lens. Barney Worfolk-Smith is the Chief Growth Officer of Daivid, an adtech company that provides creative data to clients, allowing them to measure what it calls the constituent parts of creative effectiveness. Attention, yes, but also emotional response, brand recall, and more. Worfolk-Smith argues that creative needs to start being data-led, lest it fall into irrelevance as media becomes dominant. He also unpacks the implications of commoditising creative by turning our understanding of it into ones and zeros. This is our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Barney Worfolk-Smith, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you very much for having me.
So you've been working in and around media for, I want to say, nearly 3 decades now. Is that fair to say?
I try not to put a number on it,
Okay.
but yeah, it's around that. 98 was when I started.
Okay.
So quite a while, yeah.
Well, that is the year that I was born, if I really wanted to make you feel bad about yourself. But you've worked across startups, you've worked across social video players, publishers, you're an investor in a number of startups as well. And then in 2022, you co-founded Daivid. So tell me, I guess, what drew you to the media industry back in 98, but then what led you to starting your own company eventually?
Oh, man, that's an interesting discussion. Well, I mean, what drew me to media, probably crippling student debt, was what drew me to media, because it was, a simpler time back then. And in terms of a journey, I mean, my God, you could talk for ages, but put very simply, I was media, then the dot-com boom happened, that was fun. Then I was working in digital media, that got a bit boring. So I started doing creative solutions in digital media, wanted to be entrepreneurial, did that, and sold the first company that I was involved in called Channel Flip in 2011. And then, Unruly, as I think I spoke to you about when we met the other day, was a really formative time for me. And that's where me and my current co-founder, we met, and many of the people we work with met. After that, working in a creative agency, which we're going to talk about creative and creative data today. So I've got quite a deep understanding and love of the way creative is actually executed and deployed. So that was a really important time. And through the sale of that to IPG in 2018, that enabled me to enter the world of startups. And so as well as investing and being a venture partner at a VC, it's what brought me in back together and doing something that we'd always loved in the form of what is it that makes creative effective, but being able to supercharge that with AI and bringing us to the place that we are now.
So Daivid is spelled D-A-I-V-I-D. So it's an AI company. It's in the name. Talk to me a little bit about what you're actually doing to leverage AI for testing creative.
Well, in the broadest sense, what Daivid can do is assess creative at massive scale. And that means a decoding of, that's the world that we live in now, right? There's just more creative. Adobe has said there's going to be 5x more ads by the end of next year. We know the generative AI sloppening is coming. So we're built for now, which is to assess creative at massive scale, decode that down to ones and zeros. And the reason we're talking today is that ones and zeros language is a language that media can understand. So this unification of creative and media is something that I feel very strongly about. Many people in the industry are trying to bring back together so that effectiveness can be looked at in a holistic fashion. So that's what this is about. decoding creative into ones and zeros that can then be used by the advertising ecosystem to undertake a wide variety of tasks to improve effectiveness. I could list half a dozen, but we can perhaps go into those in more detail later. But that's the overarching thing that we're doing, is taking creative data to enable overall advertising performance to improve.
So yeah, take me through some learnings, I guess. When you turn creative into ones and zeros, as you say, do you end up with a recipe for success for, I suppose it's probably different for every brand that you might be working with, but are there general findings that you have found are consistent across the whole industry?
Firstly, Jack, have a gold star, because you haven't. There's quite often an assumption that if you are able to decode creative, there's some sort of elixir of youth, that's going to that all brands are going to be able to follow to reach effectiveness nirvana, which they're not, because it's every brand is different, targeting different people. The consumers that they're trying to target are different and feel differently. So the way to unlock this power really is to unify creative data with other data, like sales data or media performance data, to actually understand what creative is working for what people and what reason. More broadly, of course, there are patterns that we see, right? I think, again, when we were chatting the other day, a big broad example is either the Super Bowl or the Christmas adverts here in the UK, which have there's a sea of sameness effect. There are a set of tropes that they all cluster around, and we see routinely the winners are those that sort of step outside of those. So that's one sort of set of patterns that we can see differentiation. Another set of patterns that I think is quite interesting more recently is with the increased emphasis on influencer, driven by Unilever's public decision about 6 months ago. We're assessing a lot more influencer creative, and this has a wildly different profile to above the line advertising, or even general social content, in the requisites for grabbing attention a bit quicker, driving an emotional spike of interest in a short period. And it's that kind of, almost like the video equivalent of clickbait. What is it that's just going to grab people in quite a facile way? So those just like a couple of things. I could go really deep. There's really interesting stuff to do with negative emotions around gambling, booze, and financial products, which sort of lays bare our human difficulty and unease with those particular types of parts of our lives. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff there.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about different media channels? I mean, you mentioned short form video, the need for that one first second of attention that you're really trying to grab someone. How does creative effectiveness vary by media channel? What do you have to do differently across them?
It's an understanding of where the ad is being deployed, really. So we're doing this in some of our MMM integrations, which was to take a whole suite of creative from top to bottom of funnel across different platforms and marry that up with media performance and sales performance data to start to see, okay, which ad specifically is working where and why. And that gives you like a kind of a profile. So, on certain types of media, it's, a full fascia, lean forward. There's a kind of a luxury to do with the amount of attention that people will give to it, such as television, for example. So attention could, in the first second, be lower than, obviously, on the converse side. You're a social media guy, so, the TikTok, which is like the ultimate dopamine kind of functionality with the swipe up, their attention really, really does matter in the first second. More broadly, there's a lot of chat about attention at the moment, that our attention spans are not actually decreasing. It just depends on where you are. So again, easy lies, difficult truths. I'd love to give you a coverall answer, but no, the reality is it's about where that creative is being deployed and what it's expected to do.
The best way I've heard the attention debate phrase, and I believe it was a behavioral scientist I was speaking to on stage at one of our events, who basically said our attention spans aren't decreasing. It's just that we can still pay attention to a 3-hour long podcast, let's say. Although, gosh, we have not gone for the Joe Rogan experience necessarily on the Media Leader podcast. So we can still pay attention to that, but at the same time, the moment we lose attention or we lose interest in something, we have an option to go and find something else that can grab it immediately, which is maybe something that we didn't always used to have. So very interesting sort of debate around that. But that's beside the point. When I spoke to Will Parrish, who's VCCP Media's chief strategy officer, on the podcast recently, we talked about how media decisions, which do dictate, as you've mentioned, the amount of attention an ad is likely to receive, sort of create a floor and a ceiling for how an ad is likely to perform. Would you say that the creative is sort of what dictates then where you are within that range?
100%. That's precisely the way that we vocalize this with brands that we work with. So, for example, every year we go to a powwow called the Icon Smart Data Marketing Summit, which is essentially where all the sort of the honchos from global FMCGs and the agencies gather. And these are precisely the people who are, in a forensic way, understanding advertising effectiveness overall for their businesses. And that window that you've just spoken about is something which is discussed and is specifically what creative effectiveness can answer. It's why is that stuff working or not? We know that it is or it isn't. We just don't know why.
Would you say it's become harder to maintain consistent messaging across different media channels?
Yeah, without a doubt. We actually did a study of soft drinks brands quite recently where we looked at, I think it was 250 ads, 9 brands and 4 channels. And the ultimate upshot headline was that the brands that were most emotionally congruous were also most effective. And I think just within, I'll speak very freely with you because you're a social media guy. It was TikTok where stuff went crazy. It's my belief that purely from an operational point of view, I think there's been somewhat of an empowerment, especially around TikTok, to go rogue quite far away from brand guidelines, which might well drive vanity metrics inside that platform. But I have a very strong suspicion that it's not actually driving brand metrics and is quite possibly ineffective for the brands.
So this is something that I've heard a lot as well. Basically, you have a lot of brands that are leaning into the creator economy more. You mentioned Unilever sort of leading the pack, right? The concern seems to be that by using creators more, you let them, and you want to give them some creative freedom because that's the whole point of using a creator as opposed to just sort of paid for media in a different way. But that just sort of allows them to sort of display their own brand as opposed to necessarily your brand, certainly maybe not your brand within the first second and a half of the content that they've created. How should brands sort of consider that and work around that?
Influencer really is still coming through its painful adolescence. And I was, my creative agency, Datbot, we were in the middle of social as it was going through the same process. Now, in terms of the influencer thing, we routinely see adoration amongst the Daivid 39 emotions in the top 4 or 5 emotions when we're assessing influencer creative, which of course begs the question, are consumers adoring the influencer or are they adoring the brand? In my mind, they're probably adoring the influencer. And so the best practice is really down to the awkward thing about briefing and the process specifically that's implemented. Now, I've worked with Goat and a Billion Dollar Boy and a variety of other agencies, and they're all doing a solid job of putting in place a good process. But the reality is that this idea is about 10 years old of just saying, oh, it's important to let the influencer do the thing that they're doing. By doing so, you routinely lack the brand recall which is required to make sure that that investment is actually worthwhile over it.
So bringing it back to the sort of ones and zeros sort of discussion that I really enjoyed, sort of framing it in that way, what would you say are the implications of commoditizing creative in this way? I mean, do you worry that you can optimize away the individuality of a given creative idea?
Implication, there's two different things there. So the implications of assessing creative at scale. I think we just have to be cognizant of the fact of the sheer vastness of the amount of creative which is already being made and pumped out across different platforms. And if you are a brand and you are only assessing the effectiveness of your creative by looking at 1, 2, or 3 ads on major campaigns, it is an enormous blind spot. It's like having a shower and just washing one finger, and the rest of your body could be filthy, and it's just not being assessed. So I think people just need to get a hold of the reality of that. If you're not testing everything, you're kind of testing nothing. And so much as I have come from a creative background and I find the commoditization of creative sometimes a little bit icky, this is the world in which we live and it's required. And it's going to get more so with the creation of generative AI. So I suppose to that first part, get over it. and you need to assess it before to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do. With regards to the second thing, I think that's more kind of an existential thing where you're talking about, does the commoditization of the study of creative kill good ideas? Is that kind of what you were talking about?
I suppose the question is whether or not it would lead to some sort of level of sameness. If things tend to optimize toward a mean, right? And we're seeing that already, to your point around all the AI slop that we're seeing, that tends to all look relatively similar, right? So how do you avoid that?
Well, this is to do with the depth of the data that we're delivering at Daivid, and it's the understanding of what is working or why. Let me give you an example. We're working with Choreograph, part of WPP, and a large FMCG provider, for which we undertook an analysis of several thousand ads, and we were able to look at a whole bunch of the depth of our data to do with emotions and brand recall and attention, etc. And then that was put alongside sales data. So we were ultimately able to understand that of the emotions, the 39 emotions that Daivid assesses for, exhilaration drove sales, right? So wicked, that's great. So what we were then able to do was to retrospectively go back to all of the creative and look for all of the examples where exhilaration was driven as a spike. And what that gives you is kind of like a Pinterest mood board of different things for different brands and different platforms that drive exhilaration that we know to drive sales. So rather than us trying to drive some sort of singularity of, again, the ultimate ad for every brand, put a puppy, give some cuddle a puppy, with green background or whatever. Instead, what we're giving is kind of creative effectiveness at specific features across different platforms or different stages in the funnel. And it becomes, give me the freedom of a tight brief is this phrase from creatives. And it gives people that, drive exhilaration. Here's a set of things that can do that. And we know that this drives sales. Happy days.
And for different brands, that emotion that is resonant on sales is probably going to be very different, right?
Wildly different. As I was saying earlier, there's lots of really interesting nuances that we see all the time. And there are certain emotions clustered around certain sectors. Financial services, obviously, trust is kind of like the gold standard and frequently features when you're dealing with the automotive industry, or an excitement tend to be these sort of emotions that cluster around those sectors. It's quite interesting. I try and think of this as like an ever-changing sea rather than some sort of static snapshot. There might be a whole bunch of let's say, automotive brands, and they're all focusing around the same way in which they're trying to make us feel. And the more closely that all becomes, the sea of sameness, then it's time for one of those ships to break away and to go and do something different that's congruous with their brand, and we could have a whole separate podcast about Jaguar here, probably. But, this is precisely the nature of effectiveness is not to be like everybody else and make that congruous with your brand.
Zig when others zag. Is that, and that's consistent through all of your findings, essentially? That is sort of a point of differentiation, while I guess playing within the relative rules of a given media environment is a relatively key takeaway?
Almost uniformly correct. Yeah. But if you can congruously with your brand look and feel different to everybody else in your sector, there was a significant chance of you being remembered more. It's the von Restorff effect. That which looks or feels different is more likely to be remembered. And if you are more likely to be remembered, it will significantly impact on desirable brand outcomes for search, purchase, share, etc.
You mentioned wanting creative and media to sort of start speaking the same language. And this is a topic that I feel like I've been talking about since I started the Media Leader, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. Seems like it's never getting resolved, at least not in the past couple of years, even though everyone wants to resolve this issue. What are the hurdles to getting creative and media teams to work closer together or talk more, communicate, understand each other a little bit better?
Let's zoom out and look at the industry rather than teams. Industry first, and then we'll come into perhaps teams within agencies or whatever else, or in brands. I think I spoke to you about my takeaways from Cannes this year. And it was people always say, oh, Cannes is this divided, it's the tech has overtaken creative, blah. And I couldn't agree more. And this year, like every year, I was out on the croisette amongst the yachts talking to the adtech folks, speaking in ones and zeros. And I was also in the Palais. And in the Palais, the majority of, the conversation was around what I might call like vibes creative. There's almost a willful desire to not engage the data or insight to enable creative to be valued in the way that it deserves. And the thing that I found a bit frustrating is that we have partnered with Walk. We've done lots of work with Effie's and Lions and Essential more generally. And there is a vast body of work out there enabling creatives to be able to speak this language and start to be judged on outcomes rather than just this sort of conjecture and vibes, etc. So that's what drives me a little bit insane, is that adtech, by speaking ones and zeros, and in fact, with just more generally media being able to speak ones and zeros, means that it can command the money. And creative has always kind of struggled a bit to be able to do that. And as times are getting more pressured financially, and there's this ever growing desire for effectiveness across all the things, the eye of Sauron has fallen upon creative. The tools are there, and even though I come from a creative background, I genuinely think creatives need to adopt that more. Now, that's a broader industry view, and Cannes is like a weird snapshot of what's going on in the industry. Inside the agency groups, for example, where you've had media and creative separated since the 80s, I mean, God, this is like another whole podcast, isn't it, Jack, to talk about what's going on in there. That those guys are very quickly beginning to think about creative at scale. Publicis in their recent earnings call talked about the importance of generative AI in production to what they're going to be doing. And so I think that they are beginning to bring those two things together. But, look, as I've said to you before, I take no delight in the discomfort which the agency groups are going to and going to have to continue to go through. But they are finding their way to this common language of creative being able to be decoded into data, which can be utilized alongside media to make things more effective for.
Do you think it would be a good idea to reintegrate creative and media agencies together?
I was at WPP Stream a couple of years ago, and Mark Reed was on stage, and he got asked by my friend Dave, who was at Snapchat at the time, asked that exact question: would you unify creative and media? And he was visibly very uncomfortable because it's a bloody difficult question. And Mark Reed, whatever you might think of him, said what I thought was quite a good answer, which was, but who would be in charge? And so, if you were to actually look at the practicalities of it, I think it's very, very difficult. I think we're now subject to forgive me for saying such a cheesy phrase, but a paradigm shift completely. The idea of creative here and media there, I think that doesn't really work anymore in the massive disruption that we're seeing across advertising right now with AI appending every apple cart in the market. So yeah, the unification is going to come through data. It's going to come through effectiveness teams. It's going to come through production. It's going to look different to the unifying of, it's not like you didn't have some East London hipster and then some media dude in a suit sat across a table talking the same language. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be different.
You mentioned Mark Reed. His predecessor, Martin Sorrell, at Cannes, in fact, said that media and creative sort of will need to come together, but it's media that is going to be leading that conversation. Do you agree with that at all?
I think unless senior creatives start speaking like holistically in an outcome-based, data-driven language, it's going to be media which leads it. That's where the money drives everything, and the money's in media.
So, as a sort of final last big topic, I mean, it is a big topic. Everyone likes talking about AI. As someone who works with and develops AI tools every day, what's your biggest fear about how AI might be used by this industry? You already mentioned the sort of what you call it, the enslopification.
Or the sloppening. That's not me. I admit that from somebody. I think that's probably my biggest fear. Right? If I were to step outside my David's shoes for a minute, we're fine actually, because we can assess AI-driven creative. We're going to be announcing a partnership with the Gen AI partner fairly soon, and we can do that just as much as we can assess human-made creative. But I think I have a little bit of an existential fear for advertising in terms of this sloppening and what it might do to, at the most basic level, response. If you just think about your own personal life and the encroachment of ultra-personalized creative stalking you across platforms or places that you've digitally lived for a while, like, I used to be a big Twitter fan and I left for a variety of reasons. I'm a user of TikTok, and I find my feed changing and becoming, frankly, odder already through the insertion of AI-generated content. I think it could have a really profound effect on advertising's effectiveness overall, and driving people away from digital town squares towards peer-to-peer communications where they don't have to deal with ads. That's my worry. I think about, if you just fill the world with crap, people are not going to want to engage with it at all. So I think that's probably my biggest concern to do with that.
And is that sort of AI used for really poorly, not ineffective ads, or is it also just the adjacency issue of these platforms are increasingly full of posts that are organic posts that aren't necessarily advertisements, that are AI slop or really just low quality content?
Let's split those two things out. Again, this is partly with my David hat, partly not. I'm already seeing, before we're seeing ads that are doing it, I'm already seeing organic content, which is, the sloppening. And it's making me feel different, perhaps less inclined to engage. I'm fascinated by it just because I'm really interested in media and advertising and communications and the way people behave en masse in digital platforms. But it makes me feel a bit weird from an organic point of view. The advertising piece hasn't even really landed yet. There's a whole series of hurdles to do with brand safety, and the actual practicalities of generating creative for brands, which is making it arrive a little bit slower than I think some people might expect. But that is going to come hard and fast, because where there's a chance to reduce creation costs by 95%, people are going to do it, right? And so we're going to see that coming in really quite hard quite soon.
What are you optimistic about? Is it just fear, or do you have genuine optimism that AI or any other sort of new tool could be helpful to the industry?
I do have optimism, and as you know, I'm an optimist generally. I look upon the introduction of AI to everything as efficiency and evolution. So through this first phase, the focus is on efficiency. It's like, what can we do to cut costs? Look at all those staff, right? Let's get rid of them. Look at this process. Oh, we can to take 95% off the time for that. And that's fine. And I suppose just a natural way in which people approach stuff. However, the thing I think is much more interesting is evolution. It's like, okay, we have these new tools at our disposal, which we use in a human hybrid way to find new types of creativity, or new ways of communicating. And it's those which I'm optimistic about. Now, can I clearly see them? No. I can see some of them.
Blind optimism.
Yeah, maybe it is blind optimism, but the thing is, I can see these opportunities developing. Like, Lovable has gone off like a frog in a sock with a, 100 million ARR in 8 months or something absolutely crazy. So there is opportunity to build and develop on these things and create new experiences and new value ultimately. So I am optimistic. It is a bit foggy, the future, and I think that's what drives a bit of uncertainty in these sorts of conversations. But as I say to everyone, from a young creative to an experienced media person like myself, is get your hands in there and do it and don't get left behind.
Well, I look forward to seeing all the different types of innovation that can come from that. Barney, it's been a total pleasure chatting. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jack. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader Podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.